and welcome to the Tree Council's latest webinar for National Tree Week, organised by the Tree Council in association with Quilcha. Today, our speaker is our own Vice President, Cormac Downey, who's going to give a talk about veteran trees. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Cormac.
Hello everyone, and thanks very much for joining in on this talk. The topic that I'm talking about today is what are veteran trees and how should we look after them. And really, I'm just going to, I suppose, bring you a ramble through some of the trees that I have dealt with over my time and that I have seen, and just to talk about what veteran trees are, the different classifications of trees, and you know how we should appreciate them and how we should look after them, really. So I'll just start off. So what are veteran trees? They're easy to recognize but hard to define. It's a tree really that shows ancient characteristics which may not just be due to age, but could result from natural damage, management, or the tree's environment. So, as I say, it's a tree with these ancient characteristics. And here these are two beech trees. This is in the Phoenix Park after a storm. And obviously the tops have been blown out. But what this has done here has kind of immediately created habitat. These trees, now they seem to have lost an awful lot of their leaf area. But I know this was a couple of years ago, but these trees are still there. They're grown away okay, but they have, as I say, created fantastic habitat. So these aren't very old trees, but I would consider these to be veteran trees in the condition they are at the moment. And some of these characteristics that I'm talking about, these ancient characteristics, would include major cavities and hollowing particularly of the main stem, and naturally forming water pools, decay holes, physical damage to the trunk, the wounding, large quantity of deadwood in the canopy. The deadwood is very important to trees, to all trees actually, particularly to veteran trees. The sap runs, crevices in the bark, under branches or on the root plate, particularly those sheltered from direct rainfall. So these would be drier areas. Fungal fruiting bodies, particularly from heart-rotting species of fungi. Epiphytic plants, and of course they would, and I believe all trees would have a high aesthetic interest, but particularly the older trees and the veteran trees. I mean, like veteran trees really are, if you think of the word, it's trees that have been through the wars. You know, they've had some damage, but they've come through and they have survived. But they have, you know, they have these scars. My preferred definition would be, and I've kind of thrown in heritage trees in with this definition. It kind of covers both, which is important. But trees that, by recognized criteria, show features of biological, cultural, or aesthetic value that are characteristic of, but not exclusive to, individuals surviving beyond the typical age range for the species concerned. Now, ancient trees are veterans by nature, but not all veterans will be ancient. So veteran trees don't necessarily have to be old. What we do need to understand is that the majority of trees have an indeterminate or indefinite growth pattern. And what that means is they're not limited in shape, size, or theoretically to an ultimate age, but are governed by their site, environmental conditions, and past management, and in some degree governed by what species they are as well. But trees, you know, how they grow, trees can produce new shoots, roots, and radial increments of wood and bark throughout their lives. So they can continuously do this and reinvent themselves. No matter how old the actual age of the tree is, this is kind of brand new growth all the time, constantly. So theoretically, as I say, trees do not have a fixed lifespan, so they could theoretically live forever. And this is a nice example It's a great collection of photographs of the Arthur Clough oak. This is in England. If you see in 1910, obviously something had happened to this tree. Either all the main limbs of the main stem were removed, or they were damaged somehow. And you can see the regrowth just had started there. And as the time moves on, you see the upper crown starting to thin out. There's possibly some root damage done at some stage, and the tree has reacted. And in 1950, you see that crown has died back and is now stag-headed with deadwood sticking up. But if you see the main stem, how it's treated and retrenched. So this new crown is now being produced on the lower stem, and it has kind of restored that root shoot ratio. So the roots that the tree has can only support a certain amount of branches on the upper part of the tree. So this is the tree kind of rebalancing itself. So as the time moves on, this tree has totally reinvented itself. Up to 2010, you have a totally new tree. So as I said, these trees can, given time and just allow them to do what they do, they can keep going. This is just an example of a veteran tree in the Phoenix Park. It was heavily reduced several years ago in order just to retain it. You can see plenty of cavities there, lots of habitat. The tree has reacted with a lot of growth. There was a lot of wood taken off this tree, and probably too much really, but it was a case of either a heavy reduction or losing the tree. And if you lose the tree, we would have lost all that habitat as well. So it was just in order really to keep what we could for as long as we could. And at the base of that tree, you see these Ganoderma brackets indicate hollowing of the main stem, which is an important feature of veteran trees. And that's that tree in leaf. And you can see how much was taken off originally and how the tree has reacted. That's quite a heavy reaction to it. There might be a kind of a last gasp in regard to its physiology and production of leaf. But it just shows what trees can do. And unfortunately, this of course being an ash, with the ash dieback, that really isn't going to help that tree in the long run. But we see these veteran trees really as habitat. So as the tree moves on in age, more habitats are produced and created. So it really is, these trees are kind of a well of species and insects, and very, very important to try and retain. So veteran trees, not to be confused with ancient trees. And we all like to think trees are older than they are. But ancient trees are those that have reached a great age in comparison with others of the same species. So, I mean, you could have a 150-year-old birch, which would be an ancient tree. If you had an oak tree of 150 years old, it's basically a teenager. It hasn't even started yet. So it does really depend on the species and its expected kind of lifespan. But they're generally low fat, kind of squat shape, because the crown is retrenched through age, basically. A wide, large trunk compared with others of the same species, and hollowing of the trunk, particularly a particular characteristic of ancient trees. And this isn't always visible, but I'll show you a picture. This is an ancient tree. I was very lucky a few years ago to visit these three huge trees on the side of a hill in Cumbria at Barradale. These was the Fraternal Four, and that was named so because there was a poem written many years ago when there were 4 trees there, but there are now 3, unfortunately. But if you can see this tree, if you see in the middle of that stem, there's a black, that's my cap there actually, and that stands at 6 foot. That's where my head would be if I was standing against that stem, just to give you an idea of the size of that tree. But if you see what the growth on that yew tree, very vigorous, vibrant growth. so again, this just goes back to that point that, you know, these trees can throw out new growth constantly and keep reinventing themselves. It's this hugely massive tree. You really have to appreciate it, and that picture really doesn't do it justice. But this tree, a limb came out of it many years ago from the upper crown, and they were able to do a ring count on it, and they got 1,500 years off the limb that was on this tree. And also they had done some DNA testing, and they had found that 2 of these trees had, so God knows how old these trees actually are. But if you ever get a chance, Barradale in Cumbria, go and see these trees. Absolutely fantastic. And this is sweet chestnut in Castletown, which I would consider getting close to an ancient kind of age. You see the center of this old tree here really has died down. You've got these stems growing from the side, being produced from, I suppose, epidemic growth, and that's just another tactic of these trees. They can keep going, so they reinvent themselves. But there's the old tree on the inside, fantastic habitat, full of deadwood, huge cavities. We see here, we try to retain this habitat. We have it propped, this large limb here, just to retain that for as long as we can. The area around under the drip line, if you like, and the main rooting area, we have mulched, and that's just to help aid its roots, and also with compaction. Because as you can imagine, people are drawn to this tree, so there's a good level of footfall around this. So that compaction needs to be managed as well. You know, heritage notable trees. These are other, I suppose, words to describe different types of trees. Trees connected with specific historic events or people. Well-known landmarks in your community. A tree with significant landscape character or architectural setting. So these are just different classifications that kind of cover all trees. So I mean, this an example of a heritage tree. This is this is in Muncaster Castle in Cumbria, a place I worked in many years ago. I was very lucky. A fantastic place, great people, run by great people there. The Penningtons, and the gardens are absolutely magnificent. You get lost in these, and definitely if you're ever over there, you need to pay this place a visit. And this picture was taken a few years ago at this time of year, actually. And this is down the gill in front of the castle. And you see this huge amount of flowers, of white flowers here. This is a Magnolia Iska. Peter Vetch crossed 2 magnolias back in the 1900s. And he produced 6 seedlings, 5 of which were white and 1 purple, I think. He kept 1 white one purple one, and he destroyed the rest. And this white one here is a descendant of that white one that he propagated. Now the color of this in itself is enough to have this as a notable tree, but its heritage is undoubtable. It's fantastic to have that link back to someone as famous as Vetch. But what it gives to I suppose the landscape is, I mean, that's invaluable really. And this, just to illustrate the size of this tree, again, that's my hat. I wear a lot of hats, but that's, again, I would be standing at 6 foot where that hat is. Just goes to show the size of that stem. Absolutely massive tree, a fantastic tree. So again, in Muncaster Castle there, ever get a chance, some fantastic rhododendrons there as well. Great collection of trees. This is in Devon, on a National Trust site in Devon. These are 2, again, I think these are champion trees. I may be mistaken, but these are 2 tulip trees. Absolutely massive trees. I couldn't get them all in one photograph, so I went with this photograph just to show this size of people beside the main stem. And these possibly were coppiced at some stage back many years ago, but the amount of timber and the size of these trees, something to hold. And just just to throw this in, not to be controversial, but I just wonder if anyone would recognize what this tree is, what species it is. That's it on the left. I tried to get it in. Again, these photographs are very hard to show, I suppose, show the scale of these trees from a distance. But this is a Sitka spruce. Everyone's almost hate the tree, but Sitka are fantastic trees if they're let grow. They are unbelievable. This really bowled me over, this tree. Fantastic tree. And here's a sycamore, again, a much maligned tree. But again, sycamores, when they get to a certain age, for me, they're regal. They're fantastic trees. Their size, their capacity for growth, I think they're fantastic trees. And this is in Grange. This is in Arbor Hill, and this tree would have been there, would have witnessed the burial of 1916 Rising, the leaders of 1916 Rising. They would have been there at the time when there was a school in a play yard, and it was a play yard. So this tree has seen a lot, and a fantastic, huge tree as well, actually. Again, lovely place to visit, and do go up close to that tree just to see how big that is. And of course, this to guard of remembrance in Dublin, two fantastic plane trees, and they would play host. And this area actually was the back lawn of the Rotunda Hospital, which is to the right of that picture at one stage, and it was kind of taken over then for this garden. But again, it's a remnant, a link to the past, and a huge amenity value to the area. I mean, to not have those trees there, it would be a pretty bland landscape, I think. So very, very valuable trees. And again, just the idea of an aesthetic landscape value. This is it's an ash tree, Fraxinus angustifolia array wood, and again, just a beautiful colour, fantastic little tree, really, and not old, but aesthetic wise, again, hugely valuable. This is an interesting tree, Grange Gomer Military Cemetery, a lovely collection of trees just beside the Phoenix Park. Lovely place to walk around, actually, and you'll find graveyards. Huge sources of tree collections, particularly old graveyards. Very surprised what you might find in there. But this is a lime tree, a silver lime. It was grafted onto a common lime, but it's a little confused. I suppose that you see the common lime on the left, which is now half the crown, and the silver lime on the right. Which is a very, very strange thing to look at, especially in the breeze, when the underside of those silver leaves start to kind of flicker and sort of wink at you, really. But it's from a distance, it's stunning, this tree. For me, the iconic Phoenix Park tree is the Hawthorn. A beautiful, beautiful tree. Very simple in many ways, but of course, gorgeous flower. This time of year, and a great tree for wildlife as well, particularly for insects and the berries in the autumn. A fantastic, fantastic tree. This I just threw this in. This is in another National Trust property in Devon, in England. This is a Quercus, a cork oak. It's the biggest cork oak I've ever seen. Now, I haven't seen any in Spain where they would have many old ones. But this is the biggest one I've seen, and again, it was very hard for me to get this in a picture just to show you what it's like to look at a gorgeous, gorgeous tree. Very different kind of feel to it. It really stood out, but a gorgeous, massive tree. And it just goes to show what can be grown. I mean, I was walking around a housing estate in Bettystown several weeks ago, and the housing estate was maybe 15, 20 years old. A little street tree planted. I walked past it, and that was a cork oak. So you don't know what, keep your eyes open when you're walking around. It's surprising what you come across. I threw this in. This is a beech tree up in the Glebe Gallery up in Donegal. It's an OPW site. And this, for me, I suppose, is a bit of arboricultural heritage. You see how they, I suppose it's an example of how trees were managed many years ago. This tree had lost a large limb. So, you know, they would have seen it as a structural defect. And then, so they would have applied a kind of a structural solution to it and bricked it up. And you would see lots of this on the continent, lots of cement in cavities as well. All with good intention to, I suppose, to structurally preserve a tree, because that's what you would do with buildings. But it's not done nowadays. But it doesn't seem to have done it any harm. But I don't think it does what it was intended to do. But it's just, I think it's a very interesting tree. And for me, that's a bit of heritage. So why are veteran trees important? Well, as I touched on before, their landscape value is huge. I mean, some people see this, they don't see anything. You see a mess. It's not worth keeping. But if you see the center is totally hollowed out and decayed, all that central wood has been basically recycled by fungi, and you see all that lovely brown mold underneath and in the middle, and that's all those nutrients ready to be recycled back by whoever wants it, really, which usually is the tree itself. And these trees can take advantage of this by dropping down adventitious roots or aerial roots and start feeding off itself, really, and again reinventing itself and reproducing itself. But the aesthetic, for me, that's the same tree. Now, to me, that's, you know, I would find it hard for anyone to argue that's not aesthetically pleasing, if not beautiful. And that's the same tree. So look, a lot of this can be down to perspective, but that tree still has a lot to give. There's not much left on it, but it gives an awful lot. And again, that's it there. Beautiful at that time of year. So we just have to be, I suppose, aware of what we're looking at, and, you know, don't take these things for granted. Veteran trees can also be a link, as I touched on before, to our past and heritage. Again, a sycamore. And as I said before, sycamore is one of my favorite trees, actually. Certainly when they get to, you know, a mature stage, full of character. And that's a fantastic tree. The Guinnesses would have walked past this back in the day. This is in Farmley, as I said, and that's it up close. Just full of character, beautiful tree, full of cavities as well. Some great habitat. But I mean, everyone that visits Farmley will walk past that tree and will see it. And again, back to the iconic Hawthorn tree in the Phoenix Park. This is a veteran, for me, this is a veteran Hawthorn. And you can see it's almost 2 trees now. And I'll go on to that later on. But as the tree gets older, you know, it kind of, I suppose, hedges its bets. These become 2 distinct columns, if you like, or 2 distinct different trees. And well hollowed out as well, but still doing really, really well. Again, full of habitat. And aesthetically, for me, that's beautiful, you know. Yeah, I mean, veteran trees, they're living ecosystems, both above and below ground. They are rare and are getting more rare. So, you know, they hold an awful lot of genetic information that reaches way, way back. So that's a very valuable source. This tree on the left, an oak tree, absolutely huge tree, massive tree. I mean, you know, the genetic information that's in this, could it have, you know, benefit for timber production, to, you know, to take to breed from this tree. This is an ash tree on the right hand side, another absolutely huge tree. So I mean, it reaches back in time, and the parents of this tree and grandparents of this tree, how far back does that go? The gene pool resource of these trees, absolutely huge, I think. You know, could they help breed trees for the future? Maybe help adapt trees to climate change, maybe adapt to the ash dieback. So all this information is in those trees. So it's just something, you know, to bear in mind. We have trees, we have less room. We're kind of running out of room in the country in a way, and less room for larger trees. And it's these larger trees that produce the heartwood that's these specialist decay fungi and specialist insects live in. So it's a resource that we're kind of losing, I suppose. We do need a diverse age range and species range, more so for the next generation, for succession of the insects and the life that's associated with these trees. And we really need to avoid what they call extinction debt. This is where you sort of have a view of this. We'll say that oak tree in this picture, and that's the only old tree around. Well, all those specialist insects will gather on that tree because there's nowhere else to go. But they're all squeezed in there, and they have nowhere to go to, nowhere to move to for new breeding grounds. So if something happens to that tree, there is a massive concentration of life in this tree that can disappear overnight. So that's a very precarious position to be in. So succession is really important. And in this picture, I've put this picture in because there's a lot of new trees planted. So you want new trees coming on, and you want trees of mature, late mature, early mature, and all in different conditions as well, just to allow these insects and the life associated with veteran trees to move around. And habitat, I mean, veteran trees really is all about habitat, nesting, hiding, feeding for animals and insects. These are real niche habitats: deadwood, decaying wood, fungi that live off these specialized insect larvae need wood in an advanced state of decay to feed on. So that's a very niche habitat. And 11% of European saprozoic beetles are threatened, and they're the most threatened species in the species community in Europe. And when I say saprozoic, very fancy word, I like to use it a lot. It's basically means it's saprozoic invertebrate is an insect that requires deadwood in its life cycle. So it really depends on deadwood, otherwise it can't live. So there's some examples. There's an old tear and an oak. Great habitat. I mean, bats, these are all potential bat roosts. And this picture on the right is definitely an active one. You can see the urine marks, which is a sure sign of the presence of bats, which of course are protected species, which just adds to the importance of veteran trees. This is a hazard beam, again another potential bat roost. It's quite a specific sort of habitat, nice and dry. And that was, anyone looking at that would see a defect, possible branch failure. Hit someone, take the branch away, which is understandable in certain locations, but you have to be aware that there is value to that what we call defect as well. So we do need to keep that in mind. These are two examples of lightning strikes actually. This tree on the left, lovely old oak tree in Phoenix Park. I've been up this a couple of times, and this has been managed over a lot of years. Dr. John McCullen there would have originally got me up this tree to try to take large lumps of deadwood out of it, because there's a path quite close to it, but still try and retain the tree. And the tree has reacted really well physiologically with growth, reaction growth. It's doing really well. But this huge strip of, we call it dysfunctional wood, that has exposed the heartwood. Again, this is really rare habitat. And again, another example of I think it is a lightning strike from that's down in Emo. Again, this very, very rare habitat, and these trees are managed to retain them there for as long as possible. And epiphytes, this is a pear tree along a wall at Old Bridge in the Wall Garden, and again you see this is a polypodium, I think, fern. I may be corrected on that, but of course it requires bark of a certain age, certain condition. You see the moss growing on this branch as well. So again, a niche habitat. That's a lovely thing to see. Epiphytes growing on trees. It gives them real character, and it's just beautiful to look at, really. And you've got rare lichens like Lobaria pulmonaria, which is dependent on a very specific part of older trees. It's unshaded bark, so it needs light, and it's usually you find them on old trees like ash. So again, that's quite a specific sort of habitat. And I suppose this the ultimate piggy. This is a fantastic tree. I found this was in Cumbria as well, and this is sort of the ultimate epiphyte. This is a rowan mountain ash growing piggybacking on an oak tree. Now in Cumbria is very wet, and in this area there's a lot of moss on these trees. Wet moss, seed gets dropped in, germinates, and all the roots need really is moisture. Plenty of moisture there on the moss. It follows it all the way down the trunk till it hits soil, and away she goes. So that's, I mean, just an example of what can happen and what can be on trees, and what they can support, and how they survive. You know, their mechanisms and strategies is quite amazing. But that's a great. I love that picture myself. Now, decaying wood or dead wood. We use the term deadwood a lot, which is it's kind of unfair because it's not dead as such. It's, you know, some people say when wood dies, that's when it really becomes alive. I mean, here's this, and a good example of retaining deadwood. This is in Derrynan, a site down there managed by Chris O'Neill. Does a great job down there. And I think it's very, first of all, it's very aesthetically, it looks great, and very natural looking. And you see how it, you know, the plants are growing on it and through it, and it's incorporated in, and it's just very natural scene. A great way to retain that type of habitat. Heartwood, exposed heartwood, as I said, that's quite a niche habitat as well, especially on the oaks, where you get this cubical brain rot. So I mean, to get this, you need big trees. So, you know, the less big trees we have, you know, the less of this we're going to have, and the less specialized habitat we have. So this, again, this stub, this will be left retained. This is access to that specialized heartwood, which will give it access into the main stem for the, you know, for the type of specialized fungal decay that will exploit it. And this is another, I suppose, another use of that. I find this an interesting picture. This tree was taken down because of its proximity to a very heavily used pathway. Now this tree was dead, or practically dead, when it was taken down, but it was left. This is in the Phoenix Park, which has, as I'm sure you all know, a good deer population. So any tree that's planted in the park needs protection, and needs to keep that protection for, I don't know, up to 30 years, I think. But this picture is interesting because this has acted, I suppose, it's like a nursery. If you see that rowan tree in the middle, anywhere else, that rowan tree would not have got that far. It would have been grazed. but it's protected in there, and it's using. For me, it's a very natural scene that, and it's great to have it in a public park, and hopefully that tree can get up and away. So that's, for me, that's another use of Deadwood, not just for what the Deadwood itself gives, but the kind of the habitat it provides as well. And again, this is sweet chestnuts, which is dead, but I think very appropriate to be retained, very appropriate in the landscape, and again has all that habitat, and has younger and older trees coming up around it, which allows for the migration, as I spoke about before, of all these unrelated saprozoic insects and vertebrates to move around and feed. And again, one of my favorite pictures of the Phoenix Park again, and you'll see a dead tree in the background there. That's a beautiful picture, very fitting. A great perch, actually, for the likes of owls hunting in the long grass below it. These dead trees and deadwood provide a lot to the environment. And again, it's just another picture of the site. This is a site in England. But for me, that deadwood in the centre there, very, very appropriate, very natural looking. So we come to, this is old sap runs and slime fluxes. Now, this is great for insects, and you see the amount of a lot of wasps there, but there's a lot of flies and slugs and everything around this, and there's a beautiful smell of beer off it. It's basically sugars fermenting, which is why they're all gathered around it. But it just goes to show how insects take advantage of all this. Now fungi, I'll just talk a bit about fungi, not the dolphin. Plants and fungi have evolved and worked together for the last 400 million years and have formed intimate relationships with each other. So they're codependent. They are essential part of the tree's ecosystem as decomposers, breaking down dead and decaying material, and as nutrient gatherers, the mycorrhizal fungi, which are hugely important. The fungi create conditions where saprozoic invertebrates thrive. These are the most threatened community, as I said before, of invertebrates in Europe. So talk a bit about the fungi. This is a Fistulina hepatica, beefsteak fungus, so called because it's when it's at a certain stage during the year, if you squeeze it, it kind of oozes red or bleeds, very, very like a steak. But this is I suppose a specialized heart rot fungi, and this is taken on a tree in the Phoenix Park. It's an annual bracket which only appears for a year and then it dies away. And there's on the right hand side is an old one, but it's great to see because these just goes to show that the trees are of that age or of that condition that they can support these type of specialized fungi. And this, when I say brown rot, this is what brown rot, I'll talk about white rot in a little bit, but this is what brown rot looks like. This is the cubical brown rot, where certain fungi will produce brown rot, certain fungi white rot. That's a very basic explanation of it. So this brown rot will take away, eat the cellulose basically, and leave the lignin. So the kind of strength is still there to an extent, but that's what it appears like. And more, I'll just show a few pictures of fungi. These are brown. These produce a brown rot. This is the Frailus Schwanitzi, excuse the pronunciation. But these generally on conifers, a beautiful fungal bracket actually, fruiting body. And of course the Latoporus sulphureus, which is chicken of the woods, absolutely eye-catching, stunning fungal bracket, fruiting body at certain times of the year. you can eat this apparently, which is why it apparently tastes like chicken. I'm not advising you do go out and eat these things, but that's why it's called chicken of the woods, because it's supposed to taste like chicken. This is the Pseudo-Inonotus striatus. Again, very interesting bracket, known as the Eiffel Tower fungus, because it's generally found on oaks, but it will leave the main buttress roots there, and like stilts, a bit like the Eiffel Tower. And those water droplets, which is referred to as guttation, you often see this on this and other fungal bodies. But basically, I think it's just a method of getting rid of excess moisture. There was an old tale that this fungus could control the moisture content of where it was feeding. I don't know if that's true or not. That's probably an old wives' tale. But it's very distinctive and quite beautiful, really. And this sort of is, when I said the Eiffel Tower fungus, this is sort of at the beginning of it. You see these buttress roots on either side, and that won't affect greatly, may not affect greatly the structural strength of this tree. But the centre will be hollowed out, but the tree can remain standing. Maripolis, this is the giant polypore on a beech. Again, it's just a stunning fruiting body, really, at certain times of the year. Again, I think it's another annual, so that will disappear into a mush later on in the year. But that produces a white, and this is what white rot looks like. And this is basically cellulose. This is the lignin has been eaten and has left the cellulose. So it's very soft and spongy. Ganoderma, very old Ganoderma bracket. And this, I suppose, the white rots, which will take away the lignin, so the tree will start to move a little bit. And this movement does kick the tree into reacting with putting on kind of reaction wood and strengthening the areas where there's movement, which is kind of a natural process for a tree. So with this movement, the tree can add on extra growth in that area. And if the tree is in good enough condition, and the vitality is good, it can, keep up with the amount of wood it loses by putting on extra wood. So again, it's just illustrates that these two, this fungi and trees have evolved together, and they know, one knows what one is doing and the other reacts to it, and it's just nature, basically. And fungi are an essential component of the nutrient cycle, of course. And wood basically is energy. So all these fungi, when they break them down, it presents these nutrients back to the ground and to the tree, which can then take advantage of it and get on top of that. And how it does that is produces aerial roots. So that's an aerial root which was about 6 foot up the main stem of this sycamore. And if you see at the top, the top part of that tree is functional. The bottom half is dead wood, basically decomposing wood, and that root is in the middle of it, and it's getting those nutrients back and feeding it back up to the tree again. So it's just that classic nutrient cycle at work. This is that fantastic sweet chestnut in Castletown again, a beautiful tree. But if you notice this root coming down again from the middle of the tree, the same thing again, taking advantage of those available nutrients. And I've seen the aerial roots on lots of different species. This a birch tree, which there's a beautiful little walk near the ferry to Garnish Island, which and I found the birch tree I saw there, middle of a hollow, and these fantastic roots coming down the middle, feeding off that decayed heartwood, and the tree doing really well. And again, a beech tree in the Phoenix Park. This tree's been managed for many years. Been up this one myself a couple of times, I think, and has been reduced slightly because it has there's a small presence of Crechmeria, which is a fungus that can have a big effect on the tree stability. So, you know, in order to retain this tree, it has received some reductions in height and weight. And the tree reacted doing really well, but if you see in the center, again hollow, and again that in there, aerial roots. So the tree has put out aerial roots from the center in down, dropped them down into where all that decomposed litter is, and taken up the nutrients again to feed this, you know, this very vital crown, which is doing really well. And just some other interesting natural strategies of veteran trees and trees in general. This is a sweet chestnut in Emo, probably one of the biggest sweet chestnuts I've seen in this country. There's a backpack just to give you some sort of scale. And this produced this epicoric growth from the base. And lots of species do this, but this the sweet chestnuts will do this into its immature stage and over mature stage. It's not all trees can produce this amount of epicoric growth at the later stages, but this is a great strategy for, you know, continuing life for this tree to keep going. And if I just go back to that sweet chestnut in Castletown, this is what happened. This is the same strategy, but these bigger limbs here, these long, bigger limbs, that's how they would have started off. But they have taken over, and that's the original central older tree is starting to regress back. So these other bigger limbs will take a step out and grow up and keep going. And in time and in turn, God willing, that this will do the same. And the tree will slowly move and start to walk, and over millennia will shift. And phoenix trees, this is an old yew tree in Castletown, in the woodlands in Castletown, fallen over, and you can see the tree, you know, kind of phoenix regeneration or reiterative growth that shot up, new trees created. And again, just a great picture of what I like to call it a walking tree. This is in Ars on Uachtaráin, lovely tree. Had fallen over, grown up, fallen over, grown up. But it keeps going. I just a very lovely picture, I think. A yew tree again, but that's going. I just wonder if you go back in a couple 100 years, will it have moved a little bit more? Layering as well. This is a horse chestnut in Kilkenny Castle in the woods there. Lovely place as well. And you can see this branch hit the ground, set down roots, and away she goes again. Huge tree on this other side. And this was sort of like an umbilical cord, I suppose. And in time, that will not be needed. That will die off. And you will have suddenly a gap between these two trees, whereas once they were one tree. And again, this tree in time has the potential to move and walk and keep going. And there's plenty of other trees that do this. The Thuya plicata, the Lawson cypress do it as well. So very effective strategies. Lime tree, this is an 18th century avenue in Castletown again. It lost its head many, many years ago, produced massive regrowth, produced a new crown, which is, you know, quite young and very vital, growing well. But if you look around the back of it, this tree looks like it is split. But again, you see the aerial roots here. So this tree has now turned into two trees, basically. So again, this tree has separated and slowly walking away from each other. These are two distinct, in time would be two distinct trees, but the same tree. This hornbeam in the Phoenix Park, fantastic tree. You can see right through this from several directions. It's starting at a lovely stage, actually. Just illustrates it starts to separate into individual functional units. These stripes going up here, these lengths of wood. In time, they will separate, or they can separate, and potentially each one into a separate tree. So if there is some storm damage done, half this tree is ripped out, the other half is retained, it's still there to grow. And again, even that half could then subdivide again into two separate ones. So it doesn't put all its eggs into the one basket, and these become these different individual functional units in the individual trees in their own right. There's some of the threats and problems we have with veteran trees. Compaction is huge problem for all trees, especially in urban environments around towns and cities. Past management practices is a big problem. Climate change, new pests and diseases. Veteran trees are very, very sensitive to change, and particularly sudden change. So you have to keep that in mind when we're trying to manage them. Compaction, huge problem, as I said. This is just a tree where it had been used as a turning circle, really, just a car quickly driving around. But what happens with compaction is exactly that. It's compacted. Water sometimes can't get down, as this picture shows. It sits there. This is detrimental for roots. And roots are so important with trees. It's the part of the tree we don't see. I think is least appreciated, but it's probably the most important part. So without the roots, there are no trees. So if you want to look after a tree, you look after its roots. So this compaction again, vehicles, even people walking can cause compaction. What are problems? Pest diseases. The bleeding canker of horse chestnut can kill trees outright in some cases, or make their condition so bad that they do have to be taken down if in an area where they are exposed to people and targets and such. And of course, just general people. I mean, trees are never the problem. We're the problem, really. And the problem is, what we have to manage is our interaction with trees. The trees can look after themselves. They have been doing so for the last 400 million years. They have no problem. But it's just when we, interact with them, that's when we need to manage them, and that's where the problems start. But people pressure generally is huge. So management, when undertaking any management of veteran or heritage trees, overarching aim has to be, where possible, to keep trees alive for as long as possible, while maintaining values that these trees offer. And it should be borne in mind that the best management option may be to do nothing. So the first thing you really need to do is you need to assess the tree. And an assessment of its structural condition and its vitality is essential to gauge what intervention is needed and, if appropriate, in regard to the tree's ability to recover successfully. So you basically, first of all, need to know, is this tree going to collapse? We're going to lose it altogether. If that's the case, then you do need to intervene. And then you need to gauge how much you need to intervene in order to keep it in such a condition that it can live on. Or maybe you're just going to maybe try and keep some sort of habitat there, or retain as much of it as you can. So this is all sorted out with the assessment. So you do need to get someone who knows what they're looking at to look at it, and to make that call. I mean, this is an example. This is in the Burren Beaches just outside in London. Amazing place. This is where they have for many years they would have coppiced beech, which may seem strange to us, but this is what they did. And a lot of these trees would have lapsed over the last 40, 60 years, and a lot of work has been done to try and get them back into a sort of rotation. And these trees are fantastic, hollow stems, but still showing great vitality, growing away still brilliantly. But in this case, props are required just to stop it from collapsing. And again, a bit of fencing around to keep the targets away. So, so less can be done to the tree. But its intervention went as just so far as to stop it from collapsing and losing the tree. And that's the great Dr. Reed there, very famous in the world of veteran and ancient trees. And this is just an example of artificial supports, propping of this this is a massive limb from a sea chestnut. So just to give it a helping hand, again, just to stop it from collapsing. What's very important is the management of the land surrounding the trees and the rooting environment. As I said, roots, so important. So you need to protect the rooting environment, particularly from compaction. The 15 times the diameter of the trunk, 5 meters beyond the crown spread, or whichever is greater. That's, I suppose, if you want to set out an area to protect around the tree, and that's a minimum. Now that's quite a large area if you're in an area where there is not much space, and this is why I said earlier, space is a big problem. These trees need space. If they don't have it, then you're really on a loser, and a lot of intervention is needed, which isn't great. So I would see that as a minimum of kind of root protection area. And it's not so much about protecting roots, but it's protecting the rooting environment, the soil structure. When you do that, you allow the roots to look after themselves. And once roots can look after themselves, they will look after the tree. And that's really how you maintain any tree. Never mind, it doesn't have to be a veteran or ancient. Any tree needs their roots in optimum condition. Veteran trees really don't like sudden changes, so you need to avoid that. It's very simple. Some simple methods of management is move the targets away from the tree. Instead of having to manage the tree, manage the problem, manage the targets. If you can reroute pathways, and don't have benches under trees if you can help it, just move them away if you have the room. Sometimes the answer can be quite simple. You just have to maybe stand back and look at the whole picture. And this is just an example of this is some decompaction work, air tilling using an air spade on a yew tree in Old Bridge, which was starting to suffer partly from decompaction. So there are methods of dealing with decompaction. And this is, I suppose, the rest of this is a circle of yew trees in the wall garden in Old Bridge, which when all this COVID thing ends, if I would recommend visit, because that's quite a collection of yew trees. And here we put down a good mulch mat of mulch, and that should be no deeper than 4 inches. That's the recommended depth. And this mulch is fantastic for roots because it protects that rooting area, and it stops the extremes of getting too wet, getting too dry, and it adds to the soil structure as that rots down. And we put up just a small fence quite close to these trees. We didn't put it out to the drip line because it's important that people can get close enough to appreciate these trees. And these are beautiful trees. These are Tolkien-esque almost. They're magical trees the way they have grown. So it's nice for people to get close enough to appreciate them, but not close enough that they can climb out of them and climb through them. So tree work to prevent structural failure. So as I said, you really want, first thing you need to avoid is losing the tree. This is just an example of a tree. This tree had a major split in its main fork, but this was retained with a good crown reduction, and with we put a bracing system, basically tied up the two main stems together with a non-invasive cable system. So this tree can be retained for a while longer and continue to be managed if and when it needs to be. But there are methods to retaining these trees.
This is an oak tree picture, which I've showed before. It's the one that's on stilts, if you like. Heavy reduction on this tree, but the tree has reacted brilliantly. Huge growth on it. Very close to the roadway. We've also put in a cable, an extra support in this tree, and tied it to a larger tree in that group of trees. So that's a belt and braces job really, and that's because this is a very, very busy part. This is on the entrance into the visitor centre in the Phoenix Park. But it just goes to show these trees can be retained. But these are managed on an ongoing basis and checked all the time. But, you know, we aim to keep this tree for as long as possible. And this sycamore, which is in Grange Gorm, absolutely, this is the biggest sycamore that I have seen, certainly in Dublin. Absolutely huge tree, but it's got Critchmaria diosta, which is a fungus that will threaten its stability. So really, it's just an example of I suppose extreme work, but I think it was required just to keep the tree there. And as you go through these slides, you see how much was taken off this tree. And again, great vitality. This tree shows great regrowth, great reaction. And that's it there afterwards. You can see even down here on the ground, the roots throwing up growth. It's a fantastic tree. But the girth of that tree is absolutely massive. So I think it's quite important to try and keep it there. This is some tree work, reduction pruning, again in the Burnham Beeches in London, where they would trial different pruning methods on veteran trees. And these are, I suppose, are at the coalface of veteran tree management. Helen Reid and Vicky Bengtson and you know, the likes of Ted Green and all that, they're really at the coalface, as I say, and they're trialing different methods. And you see that. You see the condition of these trees. You know, there's an outer, just a live outer ring on these trees, centre totally gone, and yet great vitality, great crowns, tree physiologically doing really well. But sometimes, you know, they do need to be pruned because of the state of their structural condition. Now, when we're pruning veteran trees, it's, you know, target pruning and shigo and all that is kind of out the window. So what they do is they do leave stubs, and this, I suppose, is just to try to mimic the natural conditions where, you know, a tree might have tear outs where they would lose a limb and would rip and leave big stumps and tears and cuts. And I suppose it leaves more cambial area for dormant buds to react and replace leaf area, which is really important, just to keep that photosynthetic capacity on for the tree, to keep it there. I'm babbling on. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but this just to mention, the Vet Cert is a project to develop a European-wide accreditation scheme for those working on veteran trees. It's run by the Ancient, well, it was kind of run in tandem with the Ancient Tree Forum, and it's a kind of a twofold approach. It's aimed at the practical end of things, so aimed at actual tree pruning, you know, tree surgery work, the climbers and how they would go about their work and their pruning methods. And it's also aimed at the consultant level, so people would know how to what to recommend, and to, you know, to be able to survey trees and recommend solutions to veteran tree to manage veteran trees. The Ancient Tree Forum, which is actually, that's a website you should look up and have a read through. It's the Ancient Tree Forum, a fantastic group of people, really very passionate about the trees, and some great information on that website. So there's training out there. I think veteran trees very much appreciated getting kind of more recognition. So hopefully you've learned something today. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of the photographs. Thanks, I suppose. Look, thanks. If I tell you one thing I'd like to say, if you take anything from this, is when dealing with veteran trees or any type of trees, really you need to look under the ground, its roots, the rooting environment, because without that, the tree is going to struggle. if you can manage that and protect that rooting environment, the tree will look after itself, I think. So, you know, just bear in mind underground roots. So hopefully you've enjoyed that talk. Thanks very much for listening. So Brendan, I'll hand that back to you if you want to have any questions.
Yeah, there are a few questions have come in over the course of that. I suppose the first thing is to say that in relation to the time, obviously you are keeping the attendees very happy, because I can see the participant numbers here, and the number you had at the start are still there. So that's an indication of how interesting people have found this topic. There are a few questions.
All family members, sorry.
You have a big family. Okay, I suppose the first thing that struck me when we were talking about the trees and the landscape, and, you know, the rotten trees been cut down and all the rest of it. And I know in local authorities and various places where the public is, it's a lot to do with the whole legal system and our, you know, our culture, if you like, illegal rather than trees. And it struck me that, if you notice, if you ever look at the old Constable paintings or any of the Dutch masters, anybody from that, you know, about a third of the tree scape you can see is dead or dying of some sort or another. Very different than what you see today, where we, you know, prune and chop everything. And I suppose it's unfortunate that the trees with the most biodiversity value are also the ones that are likely to have all sorts of different rots and so on. But yeah, sorry.
I think you touched on it there, Brendan. And the word is culture. I firmly believe we don't have a tree culture in this country. Yeah. Because we've been disassociated from trees for so long, and that's a big problem. And those I mean, I know there's the 18th century. There was a movement, you know, with the Brownian landscapes and incorporating nature. There was a big movement there, but, you know, we don't have a culture, and that's a big problem, I think. Yeah.
Just Claire Lyons, whom you may or may not know, has asked a good few questions. One, I suppose, I've seen you were talking about moving paths and all. In the early tree you showed in the Phoenix Park, why wasn't the path realigned there instead of the tree halved?
Yes, well, I suppose it was looked at, that ash tree, there was a huge amount of, because I did that work, that was many, many years ago, and the top of that tree was all dead. The path, I suppose, could have been moved, but when you look at these things, you do need to balance up the pros and cons, basically. Yeah.
Okay, well, Claire asked a few more questions. Some of them you had actually answered in your presentation later on. There were a few from other people about, you know, what do you do about compacted ground? And just as the questions came in, you actually answered them. So Claire has also got a question about that oak in the corner. I think it was a sycamore, but anyway, you know, the one you showed in the corner, in the one near the graveyard. Would the wall be right beside it have an impact on it? Like, what happens if the tree keeps getting bigger and it hits the wall?
The Sycamore and Grange Gorman, was it?
It was, yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
That's where the graveyard was, wasn't
it? Yeah. Would the wall have an effect? No, I don't. Not. It wasn't having an effect. Not insofar as the wall, I suppose, was a potential target if the tree failed. Again, it depends on perspective. If you go looking just at the tree, that's no good either. You need to kind of take an holistic view, look at the whole environment. You know, you have to take all, because that tree, which originally wouldn't have been surrounded by houses, but is now surrounded by houses, on two sides.
Yeah.
Okay. It has to be taken into account. But the wall itself, I don't think wasn't having a direct effect on that tree, you know.
Okay, just a quick one there. Where is the tree in the Phoenix Park? I presume it's the ash we were talking about first, because the query came in around that time. Whereabouts in the Phoenix Park is that tree that had the reduction and so forth made to it?
That tree is, now, if you come in Castletown gate, and if you get out, you're not allowed to park there anymore. So if you walk in Castletown gate and take a right directly into that area, it's down there.
Okay, now I don't know whether you'd make any better shot at answering than this. I didn't try to answer it. How do you convince a gardener of a tourist estate to leave veteran trees alone, especially when they are located away from public paths in a woodland style of area, so not a danger of branches falling on visitors?
How do you convince a gardener?
Yeah, the guy in charge, I presume that. Okay,
well, first of all, it's fantastic. First of all, that they're out of the way of people and targets. That's an easy fix.
Yeah.
I mean, a system we have used in the Phoenix Park or in OPW is zoning systems. You basically divide your area into areas that are heavily used and areas that are less heavily used. And those areas of less heavily used, they can be, I suppose, argued that you can leave them. You can concentrate your management on the more heavily used areas, especially in terms of risk to visitors and stuff. I suppose the best thing to do would be really to try and put a value on the veteran trees that are there, and look at some of the things I mentioned in the talk. I mean, so some of this, when I said an essential element is to survey a tree, to get an idea of what condition it's in. I mean, it's as important maybe to be able to do an ecological survey on that tree to see what that tree has. And once you know what something has, you can value it. You can put a value on it. You can argue its value. So really, that would be the first step would be to measure, to measure the value of the tree. And that can be put into some sort of maybe a monetary term, or just an ecological value. First of all, protected species. These veteran trees very, very often will have bat roosts, potential bat roosts. So that's protected by law, first of all. So maybe that's a point that could be made. And veteran trees should be part of that garden. It should be. It's an advantage to the garden.
Yeah.
It should be sold as such, and people brought in to show them. Brought in and have them show. Yeah.
There's a few more questions. Helen Munster and Annie Flynn have asked genetics questions. So the first one was very interested in your genetic information point. This is, I suppose, where you were referring to the ancient oak tree and the amount it had, because its 3 generations could go back thousands of years. What information do you think trees could give us about the different climate changes over time? Have you any specific examples? And the second question by Annie is, when is DNA analysis helpful? Who does this analysis in Ireland?
Well, I don't have any examples to answer one of those questions. And the DNA analysis, I think Chagos would do a lot of work in that area. Obviously, in a laboratory kind of situation. But I mean, these trees can potentially reach back for who knows how long. So, I mean, the DNA is passed on. It would have potentially come through many climate ups and downs. We would have experienced, slight climates since the last ice age, maybe. So it would have, they obviously would have survived that and maybe have adapted to some extent to those little fluctuations in the climate in the past. So that's already stored in there. So that's I would see that as potential to maybe for that, those genetics to be passed on to future trees. So these veteran trees aren't all about the past. They could be. It's argued that they're really for the future as well.
Yeah, just on the question that there's one, you may not want to take this one. It's about bus connects and the issues around that. I think Conor is a public servant and will probably be restrained in his view here. But anyway, do you want to say anything about it, Cormac?
I think all these things have to be looked at. I suppose it's unhelpful to look at these situations just from one point of view. You need to look at same as when you approach a tree. You can't look at the tree. You need to look at what's around the tree. The same with any of these schemes. You have to look at the full picture. And again, I suppose very basically, it's a kind of is the juice, or is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah,
balance these things up.
The whole issue of getting cars off the roads and the amount of climate change that could be mitigated by that, as well as air pollution and so on, is on one hand. On the other hand, you have to. So it's not an easy one, and
no, it's not. No.
I suppose to say the best is the Tree Council tends to take a balanced position on these, having looked at all the facts, and we haven't any particular conclusion reached on bus connects at this point in time. Claire also asks, increasing farm size leading to the loss of hedgerow habitat and the lack of protections for hedgerows having an impact too. Well, obviously it's having an impact. The question is there, I don't know what the latest situation in regard to protecting hedgerows is. Do you know, Cormac?
No, I mean, it's the protection as such. The main system, I suppose, is for the cutting of hedges, but the removal of hedges that can be a big problem. I know that's the old rep scheme as well. They may be kind of encouraging some situations for hedges to be cut down so they can regrow again, which is strange to me. But these are great green corridors. Hedgerows are fantastic green corridors. They link everything up.
Yeah, if you're really interested in that, I mean, there is a Hedge Layers Association in Ireland, and if you Google them, they would probably be able to answer any question you would have about hedgerows, the status of them, legal protections, etc., etc. Sorry, we can't be more definitive on that one. Yesterday, when Aina was giving her talk, she was asked what the oldest tree in Ireland was, and she said, "You'd answer that question tomorrow." So Aaron Deneen has actually reminded me of that question, and now it's tomorrow and you're here. So what is the oldest tree in Ireland?
Well, I don't know, Brendan, I'm afraid.
Okay, who's speaking tomorrow? We can pass.
Look, it's to age a tree is almost, to age an old tree is impossible to be any way accurate. Because any old tree that's worth aging will have no heartwood, so it will be decayed in the centre. So it is impossible to do any sort of ring count. So any tree of great age is quite difficult to age. There are ways of estimating ages with measurements and putting them into formulas and stuff, but that will give you, it's an estimate really. Yeah,
well, that actually answers the next question, or next part of that same question, which was, do you put an age on the veteran trees in Ireland by species? Obviously, it's not possible in very many cases. And then the next question again by Liam Collins said that, how old are veteran trees? Well, you've answered that too. And finally, the last question I see here is from Gerhard Gallagher, whom I suspect you do know. What does Cormac think about the practice of filling cavities with concrete for support?
Well, I put that picture of the beech tree up in Donegal with the bricked up cavity, that's sort of along the same lines. That used to be, that's the old way of dealing with cavities, and I've seen them. I worked in Germany. I climbed over in Germany, and I've seen lots of trees, old trees with cavities filled with all sorts of stuff, rubble, metal, concrete. It doesn't. My opinion on that is it doesn't do anything. I don't know if it's has any negative effect. But it doesn't have any positive effect.
Okay.
So it's basically if you're blocking up a hole. I mean, the tree itself can look after itself. So it doesn't need anything filled. It doesn't need any even wound paint, which people used up to quite recently. That's ineffective. So really, when you're trying to manage those sort of situations, you're managing the tree. You're trying to manage, again, the roots, so the roots can look after the tree, so that the tree can look after itself.
Okay, well listen, thanks very much for that, Cormac. As I say, it was a very interesting discussion and you kept everybody here to the end. I'd just like to announce before we go that there is another webinar on our site this afternoon at 3 o'clock. It's the annual Augustine Henry Lecture, which is a thing organised by the Society of Irish Foresters, and they have one every year during 3 weeks. So you'll find the details of that. We also have about 4 more webinars. I think there's another one at the same time, and there's 2 more on Friday. You'll find the details again on our website. And the next one that's actually directly organised by ourselves here in the Tree Council is tomorrow, when we'll be looking at Orla Farrell's effort to plant billions of trees with her group called Easy Treesy. So hope to see you all then. And thanks again, Cormac. Thanks a million.
Thanks for listening, Edward. Cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye.